Hey everybody, how's it going? Welcome back to Reading in the Dark. Byron here. So this is my first video back after quite a while. I've been sick for the last couple of weeks, in case you weren't aware. I was actually basically dizzy and feeling sort of nauseated for the past like 2.5 weeks. I'm actually now finally starting to feel better. I'm not dizzy anymore. Thank you to all of you that were so supportive and so kind to me during that time. You sent me a lot of really nice messages and I really appreciate it. This video is going to be my February TBR video, and this is also the first video that I'm really posting in earnest in front of my new bookcases, which I haven't really totally gotten the hang of yet in terms of this whole lighting situation and all of that, but like it's a work in progress, so bear with me. So in the month of February, I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. I have exactly 8 books on my TBR for this month. And there are also a couple of readathons this month that I'm considering taking part in. One of them is Contemporary-a-thon, which takes place between the 11th and the 17th. And then the next readathon starts right after that, and that is Thriller-a-thon between the 18th and the 24th. But just my generic vanilla TBR for February. The first book is a book that actually I've already started, and it's right here, so I'm just going to actually pull it down off the shelf. And that is Fire and Blood by George R.R. Martin. This, in case you were not aware, is a prequel to the Song of Ice and Fire series, aka Game of Thrones. So this is sort of like book 0.5. This is a prequel that takes place, what does it say, 300? Yeah, 300 years before the events in the first Song of Ice and Fire book, A Game of Thrones. Which is basically where the TV show starts. So this is a prequel that takes place 300 years before that and follows all the sort of exploits of the crazy Targaryen family. This is a family of, basically a dynasty in Westeros that is, they have the blood of the dragon in them and they can't be burned by fire, and they are inbred and they all have really crazy silvery white blonde hair and they're just intense and a little bit crazy. They are a lot of fun and I love the Targaryens, and so I've already started this. As you can see, on my first sitting I got about 107 pages into this book, and then I put it down because I was reading about the conquests of Alexander the Great and it was getting kind of confusing, so I put this down and I'm going to pick it back up again and try to zoom through this, because then the next book on my TBR will be A Game of Thrones by George R.R. Martin. Everything's falling down. A Game of Thrones by George R.R. Martin. This is the first book in the series. This is sort of like an Iron Age fantasy series with dragons and swords and spears and stuff like that. If you don't know anything about Game of Thrones, who are you, first of all, and second of all, yeah, that's what it is. So I should point out, too, one of my goals for this year was to read more fantasy. So I'm not only reading the Game of Thrones series, I'm also going to read through the Harry Potter series, which I have never read. I'm sorry, that's embarrassing to admit, but it's true. And I'm going to read some other fantasy novels that I purchased last year that are on my TBR as well. But yeah, so I'm sort of killing all the birds with one stone in terms of fantasy and reading and series. This is the edition that I ordered off of A Books, which I got a refund for because, unfortunately, very, very busted. So I may read this, or I may try to find a nicer copy of it, but that's not really important. So I'm going to read this as my second book, and I'm hoping that I can get through both of these in February. I found the first book a lot easier to read than I was worried that it was going to be, so I think it's actually reasonable to think that I could read both of these big old tomes in the same month. That book is like 600 or 700 pages. This book is same, 691 or so. So this is going to be my second read for the month. And then the third book on my TBR is a book that has been on my TBR so many times for so long, and that is Asymmetry by Lisa Halliday. I have this on my Kindle, and I'm just going to read the blurb. It says, told in 3 distinct and uniquely compelling sections, Asymmetry explores the imbalances that spark and sustain many of our most dramatic human relations: inequalities in age, power, talent, wealth, fame, geography, and justice. The first section, Folly, tells the story of Alice, a young American editor, and her relationship with the famous and much older writer Ezra Blazer, a tender and exquisite account of an unexpected romance that takes place in New York during the early years of the Iraq War. And then in the second section, which is called Madness, is narrated by Ammar, an Iraqi-American man who, on his way to visit his brother in Kurdistan, is detained by immigration officers and spends the last weekend of 2008 in a holding room at Heathrow Airport. And these two seemingly disparate stories gain resonance, and their perspectives interact and overlap, and blah, blah, blah. And then there's a third section that it doesn't actually say anything about on this blurb, which is weird, but I understand that the third section is told through the form of an interview. And so I think they're both written in different voices, like in terms of first person or second person or third person type thing. And then the last section is an interview. So it should be interesting. It's supposed to be a very sort of experimental book in terms of like exploring the boundaries of what novels can be and what novels can do. And a lot of people have had very strong opinions about this book, either positive or negative. Russell from Ink and Paper blog and on his BookTube channel, which I'm a big fan of, really, really loved this book. And then some of the reviews are quite negative. So I'm very intrigued to finally get around to read this book, which I selected for last year's Contemporary-a-thon and never got to, and to see how I feel about it. I have a feeling that the avant-garde aspect of it is not going to bother me because I generally like things that are a little bit outside the box and weird. So I'm excited. So I am, what was I going to say? I'm expecting to enjoy this one, and I'm excited to dive into it. The next book on my list is a thriller that is like loosely Valentine's Day themed. This is called The One. This is written by John Mars, and this is basically set in a world where you can take a DNA test and you will be matched up with your soulmate, basically. That's the promise made by Match Your DNA. A decade ago, the company announced that they had found the gene that pairs each of us up with our soulmate. Since then, millions of people, blah, blah, blah. 5 very different people have received the notification that they've been matched. They are each about to meet their one true love, but happily ever after isn't guaranteed for everyone because even soulmates have secrets. So this is a thriller, and I've been holding on to it, so I figured I would wait until Valentine's Day time to read it, and that's what I'm going to do. The next read on my list for my TBR is An Orchestra of Minorities by Chigozie Obioma. This book is written by Chigozie Obioma, who is the author of The Fisherman. He's a Nigerian author. I watched an interview with him and found him really, really interesting. The blurb for this says, An Orchestra of Minorities is narrated by the chi, or spirit, of a young poultry farmer named Chinonso. His life is set off course when he sees a woman who is about to jump off a bridge. Horrified by her recklessness, he hurls 2 of his prized chickens off the bridge to show her the enormity of the fall. The woman, Nadali, is stopped in her tracks. And then he falls in love with her, but she's from a different class than him, and he goes to an illustrious school to become, like, worthy of her love. But then, when he arrives in Cyprus, he discovers that he's been utterly duped by the young Nigerian who has made the arrangements for him. Penniless, homeless, we watch as he gets further and further away from his dream and from home. So it's a take on the Odyssey. But apparently it is very, very inventive and very much steeped in sort of the traditions of Nigerian storytelling. So I'm really excited for this book. The next book on my TBR for February is the book that my dog chose for me. So if you watched my TBR for January, you know that I'm doing this new thing. People have these TBR jars, you know, where they have a jar like this one that I haven't set up yet. And they put all these strips of paper inside and they write the titles of books that they own but haven't read yet. Oh God. What I'm doing is to choose 2 different books that I'm not sure which one I want to read. Assign each book a number, 1 or 2. Because I have this adorable little Jack Russell Terrier named Phillip, and he loves to chase his tennis balls. But what's really, really fun is on the rare occasions that I've had more than one tennis ball out, and they're both thrown at the same time, he can't decide which one to bring back. He picks up one tennis ball and starts to bring it back to you, but then he sees the other tennis ball, and he drops the first tennis ball and picks up the other one, and this goes on for some time, and then he eventually chooses one and brings it back. So what I thought I would do is write a 1 on one tennis ball, a 2 on the other tennis ball, assign a number to each book, and see which one he brings back. And this time I was choosing between Mother of Invention by Caeli, Wolfson, Widger, and The Abyss novelization by Orson Scott Card. So I assigned number 1 to Mother of Invention, and number 2 to The Abyss, and here's what happened. Come on, Phillip, bring me a ball. Which one is it? Which one is it? Let's see. What you pick? Oh, good, you picked number 1 again. Yay! All right, this is yours. So it looks like I'm going to be reading Mother of Invention after all. Finally, after all this time. This is another book that I had in my TBR for Contemporary-a-thon in the summer of 2018, and I never got around to it, and I keep putting it off, and I've really wanted to read it. I heard about this book on Writers on Writing, which is a podcast that I love, and I will try to remember to link in the description below. Last summer, when I was first starting this channel, and I'm finally going to read it in February. I'm very excited. Mother of Invention basically is about a woman who is an executive in a company that has this thing out now called the Seahorse Solution, which is basically a medical, I don't know if it's a drug or a procedure or what, that shortens pregnancy in women from 9 months to 9 weeks, along with other pregnancy experience upgrades, it says. And so as the first human trial is approaching, she's very excited, but then things start to go wrong, of course, and she discovers the nefarious secret backstory behind the drug that's just terrifying and bad, and it's a thriller, and so things happen, and I'm sure it'll be thrilling. So, because it's a thriller. The next book I'm going to read is, well, the next 2 books that I'm going to read round out the list, which makes it a list of 8 reads. But it's really more like 7 reads, because these last 2 are plays, and so they're relatively short. One of them, of course, I've read before, and that's Hamlet by William Shakespeare. If you don't know what this play is about, it's about the Prince of Denmark named Hamlet, who was named after his father, the King Hamlet. After King Hamlet has died, and his uncle, Prince Hamlet's uncle, the king's brother, Claudius, has ascended to the throne and is going to be marrying the queen, Prince Hamlet's mother, Gertrude. And then the ghost of King Hamlet comes back to his son and tells him that he was murdered by his brother, Prince Hamlet's uncle. And that is how his uncle, Claudius, the dead King Hamlet's brother, came up with a way to become king and marry Gertrude. I just made that complicated. I'm not sure how. But anyway, that's Hamlet. So he realizes that his father was murdered and wants to avenge his death. And he also kind of goes a little bit crazy in the process. And he's very introspective. And this is where the to be or not to be speech comes from. And it's my favorite Shakespeare, although I haven't read all of them. So that's the first thing I'm going to read. And the reason I'm reading it, even though I've read it before, is that I have a subscription to the Shakespeare Company here in Orlando. And they're doing Hamlet. And so I'm going to be seeing the play, and I haven't seen it before actually on stage, and so I wanted to read it again before I saw it. The next play that I am going to read, however, is another play that is being performed at the Orlando Shakespeare Company, and that is A Doll's House by Henrik Ibsen. And actually, just to keep things complicated, they're not actually doing A Doll's House, they're doing A Doll's House Part 2. So A Doll's House is a very classic play by Henrik Ibsen, and someone wrote, in the modern era, wrote a sequel to it. And I didn't know anything about A Doll's House, so I had to look it up. And it's basically about a woman named Nora who spent her whole life married and, sort of like the ward of her father, and then the faithful wife to her husband, and has been sort of sheltered from the world. But now that her husband is sick and dying, she has to borrow money from a dangerous man to travel to Italy in order to save her husband's life. And in doing so, she exposes herself to danger and to the complexities of the outside world, and sort of has an awakening of her own and starts to question everything that she's always taken for granted about her life. And that's A Doll's House. I guess that's it. So I'm thinking that between Hamlet and A Doll's House, that's about the same amount of reading as a full novel, because plays are generally a little bit shorter, and in theory they should only take you about as long to read as it would take to see the play performed. So obviously with some breaks, maybe a little bit longer. So that should be fair. Even though this is 8 books, it's kind of like 7. However, the reason I did that is that I'm reading 2 big, long George R.R. Martin tomes. And so I wanted to give myself that leeway. If I have time to read a 9th book, then I will. But if I don't, it's fine. Also, this might, if I do finish these 8 books with time to spare, that could theoretically mean that I have room in my schedule to take part in either Thriller-a-thon or Contemporary-a-thon. So we'll see. But as it looks right now, that is my TBR for February. I'm very much excited to dig into some of these books that have been on my TBR for a very long time, like Asymmetry, The One, Mother of Invention. And I'm also really excited to make good on my promise to read more fantasy in 2019 and to dig into these books by George R.R. Martin. I really, really enjoyed A Night of the Seven Kingdoms, which I read for Booktubeathon last summer, which is a collection of novellas that are prequels to the Song of Ice and Fire. And so I've been looking forward to digging into all of the books from the Game of Thrones series for a long time, and I'm really excited for all of it. So that's my TBR for February. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please hit the like button below. And if you loved this video and you would like to see more content like this in the future, feel free to subscribe to my channel. That would really mean a lot to me. And then, of course, you can hit that bell icon, and that will ensure that you're notified every time I post a new video, which theoretically, barring any more weird, mysterious illnesses and bouts of vertigo, should be posted every week on Mondays and Fridays. We're hoping that that can be a consistent thing. So, in the future, I'm going to be possibly posting TBRs for these readathons. I have a gigantic book haul or two that I need to post on here, which is just like, it's such a mess. I bought way too many books in January. So I have all those really exciting videos coming for you later this month, and I'm excited to share all of that with you. And until next time, I will be here in the dark reading. Bye, guys.